Well, hey, everyone. Welcome back to the Social Media Church podcast. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Magnuson, not joined today by my other co-host, Nils Smith, but I am joined today by one of our probably top 5 fan favorites of the Social Media Church conference. And we realized that not everybody listening to this was able to attend the conference. Stay tuned. Watch this space. There is incredible stuff coming. And a little birdie told me probably some replay access. So make sure that you're on our email list, subscribe to all of those things. That is the number one question we're getting asked right now. For those who attended and weren't able to attend, how do we watch all of these incredible speakers at the conference? Well, that is coming. So make sure you're following us on social media, listening to this podcast every week. We will give you instructions coming very soon as we roll out our post-conference plan. Lots of cool things coming, lots of I don't want to say too much, but one of the things that we're going to be doing in the meantime is having some of our speakers from the conference come back, especially ones who haven't been on the podcast that we want to make sure that you're introduced to. One of whom we have here today, Dr. Jen Bennett, one of just the most incredible speakers that we had at our conference this year, a new voice to me. And so I know probably maybe a new voice to some of you listening. And Dr. Jen, we're just so excited to have you here. And after I listened to your talk at the conference, I could not wait to get you on the podcast. There were so many comments on your video specifically about how what we're going to talk about here today really impacted people, help them reshape and rethink about how they're doing social media within their church and how ultimately they're telling stories. But Dr. Jen, do you want to just let us know, introduce yourself to our audience, and just kind of kick things off?
Yes, thank you so much for that great welcome. It is my absolute pleasure to be here today. I love talking all things social media and the church. So, Aaron, thank you so much for having me. As you mentioned, my name is Dr. Jen Bennett. I currently live in Indiana. My family and I moved here a year ago after I was offered a professor position at Indiana Wesleyan University, where I teach strategic communication classes. And there's really a funny story behind that because I never imagined myself living in the Midwest. I am originally from Florida. Then we were living in North Carolina for 2.5 years. And I remember years ago, I said, I will never live in the Midwest, never happening. And here we are. We survived our first winter. I feel like we're becoming Midwesterners. So life has been
How
good.
was that winter, by the way, living in Florida? And I don't think there's a ton of snow in North Carolina. How was that first winter? I have family in the Midwest in Wisconsin, so I'm curious from your perspective. How that was.
We made it. It
Nice.
wasn't as bad as we had envisioned it to be. I think we came up with like these worst case scenarios, where we would be trapped in our house and like I wouldn't be able to drive, and I was terrified of driving, but we did it. Like the roads get cleared so quick here that it's absolutely no issue. And I tell everybody this, I felt like a real adult driving out there in the snow. But yeah, we survived, and here we are, loving it.
That's awesome. And when did you move to Indiana? I'm curious if you've taught physically in classes, or did you get the job there during the COVID season where you've only been teaching online classes?
Yeah, so I did get the position when all this craziness with COVID was happening. We still met in person, but I had to teach with a mask on. Students had to wear masks. We were, separated. So we didn't have, we had to have classrooms that were big enough to keep students separated from each other. But it actually ended up being a really great year on campus. The hardest part was teaching with a mask on. I mean, that's just that's not easy to do. So
the irony of teaching strategic communication with a mask on, strategically had to do that. I want to hear about what separates strategic communication apart from communication. But Dr. Jen, what did you do before your teaching career there in Indiana?
Yeah, goodness. I feel like God has had me on a path with a variety of things. So prior to that, I was working at Wake Forest University, where I
Oh,
was the
wow.
communication and program director for the Center for Entrepreneurship. So I had the opportunity to do everything communication wise, along with teaching entrepreneurial marketing there. And then prior to that, I was at home. In 2009, I had my son,
Wow.
and in 2011 I said, you know what, I want to be home with my kid full time. And at
Mhm.
that time I was teaching high school students, and I was a school administrator at a private Christian school. And so I
Wow.
resigned. I came home to be with my son, and it was at that point that I was like, okay, I like being home, but I want to keep doing stuff. And so
Yes.
I um dove
Spoken like
into,
a great entrepreneur, right?
yeah,
Spoken like a
right.
true entrepreneur.
Exactly. Yeah. And so at this time, social media was getting super popular. And I
Yes.
was like, you know what? I really like this social media thing. So I dove in, ended up working with a Forbes top 10 social media influencer, partnered with her, and just learned a ton of stuff, and ended up really helping ministries, churches, leaders, businesses, organizations with their online platforms. And so
Wow.
God just opened this new door for me to really help people with their online presence. I started speaking at conferences, and it was really a great season of my life. And then obviously when my son got older, I decided I wanted to start looking at getting into higher education and
Yeah.
working on college campuses. So here I am.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
incredible. So great. Dr. Jen, you go by everything I see is Dr. Jen. So if your close friends call you Jen, I've just learned you as Dr. Jen. So I'm just going to keep saying Dr. Jen. Is there a doctorate behind the doctor, or where does the doctor come from?
Yeah. It's my doctorate that I got. Gosh, when did I graduate with it? I can't
You don't
even
have to say the
remember.
year
It
if
was
you
like,
don't want. I am curious. Where did you graduate from, and what
yeah,
what is the doctorate in?
I think it was in 2013, Nova Southeastern University, which is
Wow.
a university in South Florida. My husband and I went at the same time, and we got our degrees in instructional leadership and curriculum development. And
Wow.
so it has really, it's really worked out well for us. Yeah.
What a unique marriage of that concept of kind of just the strategic parts of
Yep.
communication, and then marrying that to this digital age and implementing it on social media. And there's so many things that you've done, writing a book, doing a podcast. I don't know how you have time for all of it. You're also teaching students how to do this for themselves, contributing to conferences like the social media conference. I know that they're all kind of connected, but that's a lot of stuff, as well as raising a family. So let's dive into strategic communication. Obviously, most of us have heard of a communications degree. We maybe have even heard of different branches within that college at a
Mhm.
particular university or college. What specifically sets strategic communication apart from just a general communications degree?
Yeah, so strategic communication, you kind of think of it like an umbrella term. It
Okay.
includes things like public relations, marketing, advertising, social media, all of those things. And with the way our world is moving forward with
Yes.
online, communication, traditional communication, I mean, this is what I love about this degree program is that you get a degree in strategic communication, you're going to be useful to a company, an
Totally.
organization, because companies today need help with their communication, whether that's in PR, marketing, advertising, social media. So, yeah, it kind of encompasses all of that, which to
Yes.
me makes it super exciting.
Yes. And I can make a guess at where or at how this lands you to talking about things like storytelling. But I'm curious for churches, because we know that communications is a big piece within
Yeah.
churches, in some cases because it's so lacking, and in other cases because there needs to be communication, but maybe the strategies aren't there, or it's just a big part for both large and small churches. So if you're listening to this podcast, you fit into one of those categories. One of the things, at least on this podcast, that we don't hear a lot about, that I'm excited that you're here, is that intersection of the secular world as well as the nonprofit or religious side of things, in the sense that we hear about the importance of communication on the church side, but you're talking about communication lacking a little bit in this digital age in the secular market as well. Do you want to kind of go from the secular market, what they're struggling with, and then how does that apply to us as church leaders?
Yeah. So, I actually think that there is a common thread here. I think both secular and religious organizations, I
Yeah.
think one of the biggest things that they both struggle with is storytelling.
Wow.
I think companies, businesses, churches, ministries do not know how to tell engaging stories. I mean, a lot of times you will go to the social media feed, whether it's a business or a church, and all you see are promotional posts.
Yes.
Hey, here's our new product, buy this. Hey, here's our church service, come see us. And
Yeah.
they're lacking in storytelling. And one of the things that I always share with my students is that if you go to like Nike, okay, they are all about storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
You hardly ever see posts about their products. Instead, it's usually
Totally.
some kind of inspirational story
Yes.
that they are sharing. And I think we've got to take cues from that. And they're not the only
Yes.
company that does that. There's other companies
No.
too. I think it's Red Bull also. They're
Mm.
like an energy drink. And
Yeah.
yet they have this whole niche that
Yeah.
they've put out there where they are sharing the stories of like these extreme sport athletes. And it's like, they're
Yeah.
not talking about their energy drink. And so I think that's the one area that I see
Yes.
where companies and churches and ministries are lacking is the storytelling aspect.
Right. So before our listeners write Nike, of course, like we can't, why are we talking
Right.
about Nike? We can't, right. And I think that there's parallels and I want you to specifically point those out because it's not about the resources that Nike has. I don't even think it's about the brand awareness. I
Right.
don't even think it's about the quality of products, all of which are there. Yes. And I don't know, Dr. Jen, have you had the opportunity to tour the Nike campus there in Portland, Oregon?
I have not. The one that I
Okay.
toured years ago was Southwest Airlines, their whole social media
Oh,
um
wow.
offices and everything, which was incredible. But Nike,
Okay.
I have not, and I would love to.
Okay. So I have a few buddies. So I grew up in Oregon. I was born in Portland. I grew up like an hour south in a small town called Albany. And then when I played football at Oregon State, a lot of my former teammates now work at Nike. I have some former high school teammates that work at Nike. And one of those high school teammates, good childhood friend, works there. They they all have like a job, but if they want to also become what they call a storyteller, they can do that, and they give tours to people who are visiting the campus. Those tours could be athletes that are sponsored. It could also just be other business professionals who happen to find themselves on the campus. But every building, this is all proving your point about story and just how
Yeah.
Nike thinks. It's not just about their social feeds. It's not just about their digital strategy. It's not about it's not exclusively about any of those things. Every single building, down from like small little things. I remember being in the Tiger Woods building, and there's details that you would completely miss. There's like a tiny little golf ball hidden somewhere in the wall, and there's like tees and certain things that you could
Wow.
easily miss. And so that's why they have these storytellers to point all of these things out as you're taking the tour at Nike. Hey, everything here, down to the tiniest architectural details, our story. And so when our employees are walking around, when our athletes are walking around, when anybody is here, it is all extra meaningful and extra important, and ultimately reinforces they call them maxims, which by the way, they have posted all over their campus. And it just, everywhere you look, reinforces this idea of who we are as a brand. and naturally you resonate with those things and naturally you buy because of that, but it all ties back to story. So I want to further your point, but for someone who's like, well, we can't do any of that because we don't have the resources. What are those parallels that aren't about resources that we can start implementing and executing upon as we think about story and integrating that into our churches?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I've got to get to Nike. I want to
Yes, you
see
do.
all of that.
It's incredible. It's truly
Yeah,
incredible.
I just can't even imagine. So yeah, that's a really great question because that's something that a lot of churches specifically come up with. They're like, we're too small, we don't have the resources, we don't have the budget, we don't have anything to do stories like these other companies are doing.
Right.
Here's the great thing. Every single one of us have a phone. Like all of us do. And
Yes.
I can tell you, people are not looking for perfection online. They're
Mm-hmm.
just not. They want to see true, they want to see real. They are not looking for a perfectly put together video of this or that. They're just not. And so if your budget is limited, you can find somebody in your congregation that will allow you to do a video from
Yeah.
a phone and you can upload it to social media. And here's the
Yes.
thing, phones today, like they are doing some incredible things
Mm-hmm.
between the cameras and everything that's right here at our fingertips. You don't even need the green screen, all of
Right.
you don't need any of that to put incredible
Yeah.
stories out there. And if you feel uncomfortable with video, well, you can do posts on
Yes.
social media around storytelling because
Yes.
people enjoy those also. And so I think we're done with the days of saying that our budget doesn't allow for this. You know, years
Have
ago,
to
I
be.
was helping a church plant and we had nothing. And so what I did was I found people in the congregation who wanted to serve the church
That's
and
right.
had skills in different areas. So I
Yes.
actually had a photographer on the team who loved to take pictures. So every Sunday or church events,
Yep.
she took pictures and we loaded them up on like Google Drive.
Yes.
And then I had a guy who loved doing video and he had some video camera
Yep.
of his
That's
own.
right.
He utilized that and did some videos for us. And so this was a church plant. And so I think that's key also is that if you don't have the equipment, find people in your church who have a passion for that
Yes.
and they might be willing to jump on in and help out.
Totally. And don't say they're no for them. This is a little side from just the story thing. And we had lots of people at the conference speak about building teams and building volunteer teams. I was
Yeah.
actually literally in a meeting yesterday with a creative who is on our team at the church out here in Los Angeles. And he was talking about when he was first on staff at our church and just kind of getting started. He didn't even really know what kind of a budget he had to work with. Now, we're not a small church, so there probably was a budget, but he just went up to a videographer friend of his because he's in that space and he's like, look, I have no money to pay you. He just told him, I have no money to pay you. I know we could make this really awesome piece of content. Would you be willing to help? Like, I'm sorry, like I don't have anything to pay, but would
Yeah.
you want to offer? He said yes. They made some really cool stuff, and now that stuff that he made is like some of the most convertible content that this videographer has in his portfolio to where he's getting jobs because of the stuff that he did.
Right.
And I'm not saying that any of that is necessarily going to happen every time, but the more of the thing is be honest about where your budget's at. And just because it's zero doesn't mean the answer is no. And so
Right.
you can make awesome stories. You can do all of these things with $0 in
Right.
your budget for all the
And
reasons that, yeah,
we have not because we ask not. And so we
that's
just
right.
have to get out there
So
and
good.
be brave and ask people.
Yes. So how can we, as we take, I'm curious, two things where I want to go. I want to stay in this boat for a little bit longer, but I also want to move to the place of, I think we get confused because there's so many channels and it's not just bad storytelling or a lack of storytelling on one channel. It's how do we get all of our channels in unison with each other so that they're doing different things? We're not over communicating. I guess over communicating is the wrong word. We're not communicating the same bad message in multiple places, but we're using them symbiotically to work together. But I want to stay in the storytelling vein for just a little bit longer. What are maybe one or two things that we can do story-wise, some practical ideas to replace maybe just one of our promotional posts that we're going to throw out? What's a way that we can change that promotional post with a story?
Yeah. So good question. The first thing I want to say is, and I'm a big believer in this, is you don't have to be on every social media platform.
Good.
So
I
start
sign
with
off on that as
one.
well. Yes.
Yeah. Start with one and do it with excellence. Secondly, like promotional stuff and then incorporating storytelling into that. I think a big part of that is, so let's say, I'm trying to think here off the top of my head. Let's
Yeah.
say you're going to do a sermon series on Moses and following
Yeah.
the calling of God when he calls, and
Yeah.
the excuses that we end up sharing with God when he calls us. Oh, I can't do this.
Yeah.
People won't listen to me. I don't
Right.
speak well, all that kind of stuff. So instead of doing a post about, hey, our next sermon series is going to be on Moses and being called. Hopefully, people come up with more of a creative title than what I
Yes.
just said. But what I would do is I would be trying to find someone in the congregation who has a story that might be similar to like Moses's story, where maybe God was calling this family, kind of like mine, to move
Yes.
to another place in the United States, but they were scared out of their mind. They
Yeah.
didn't know if they could do it. They didn't have all the answers up front. They questioned God.
Yeah.
Or somebody who is being called to ministry. And again, how am I going to do this? I don't have a seminary degree. I
Yeah.
stutter over my words, different. I would look for people that match up with what you're going to talk about. And then
Yes.
I would either do a quick 3-minute or less video where they're sharing their story, or I would do a post and include a graphic of them, maybe at their job, their work, ministry in action, something,
Yeah.
so that then you can share somehow that story that coincides with that sermon series. And so
Yes.
that is what is going to connect with your audience.
Totally.
Because, and this is one of the things I shared at the Social Media Church Conference, is
Yes.
that when your audience connects with stories, when they see their life in the
Yes.
life of somebody else, then they're like, oh, I'm not alone. Oh my
That's
gosh,
right.
that guy's went through exactly what I'm going through. I got to get to church and listen to this. And so it makes all the difference.
That's right. My head is spinning. So many good ideas here. Just thinking about, and there's so many applications to that. We want to promote this. Let's find a story that corresponds with that and tell the story. And there's going to be natural promotion that happens out of that. And I think one of the comments that I was going to make about Nike as well, that again, lots of brands like Nike and even churches that are doing this really well. People connect with people, not
Yes.
brands.
Right.
And they might resonate with a brand, but it's because of the people. And if you go to Nike's page right now, go to Instagram, go to Nike, go to any of their pages,
Yep.
what you see is almost 99% people, athletes. And I resonate with this athlete because they're like the sport that I like. Okay, I'm going to rep Nike because I resonate with this athlete. Now,
Right.
there's some really interesting, I should say, there's some really fine lines here that I would, maybe it's for another time, that I would also love to dive into, Dr. Jen, about the celebrity culture. Everybody right now, and if you're not, you should, is listening to this Mars Hill podcast that Christianity Today produced. Have you listened to that, by the way?
I have. I've listened to one of
Okay.
them. Yep.
Okay. I just have some, we might get into that at the end. So stay tuned. And if this conversation, this is a good opportunity to remind you as a listener, if this conversation is inspiring you in any way, or you're thinking of somebody else, just share this link with them. Wherever you listen to your podcast, hit subscribe. Share this link out. This is such a great conversation. I'm enjoying. I know it's going to impact church leaders who are tuning into this. We want as many of those as possible, not for our sake, but for the sake of the advancement of the kingdom of God.
That's right.
You see people, and when what I see churches lacking in most is we attend churches probably because we can see ourselves in the church, and a lot of that has to do with who we see on stage, who's leading worship, who's communicating, and it can also happen with even small group leaders and some of our most impactful volunteers. We are connected to a church because we can see ourselves there and we're connected there. And that doesn't have to do with the name of your church, any of that. It has to do with the people who are in your church. And so figuring out how do we tell more stories, yes, but it's because of the people. And how do we give them more connection to the people, whether it's people on stage or whether it's people that maybe have a prominent leadership role somewhere within the life of the church? How are we exposing them and their stories more so that other people can run across and say, wow, I really like this church and I attend this church because of this person? Do you have thoughts on any of that, Dr. Jen?
Absolutely. Yes. People connect with people. And
Yeah.
that's what the church is all about. Like, we need
Yes.
each other. And so if you share a story about somebody who overcame the crippling fear when they were diagnosed with
Yes.
cancer and how God led them through that, that person's going to be able to
Yes.
connect with somebody else in the congregation that is currently going through that, somebody that was just diagnosed with cancer. So all of a sudden, you are not only sharing a story, but then you're bringing people together. And
Yes.
that's where it's at. Because when you can make that connection and then you start getting people talking,
Totally.
then amazing things happen. And so, yes, I
Totally.
think we've got to really focus on the fact that people connect with people, and
Yes.
we've got to know what's going on in the lives of the people that are attending our church, because
That's
when we
right.
know what's going on, then we've got stories to share about how God
Totally.
is working in the lives of these people, and that just makes an incredible difference, not only in the church, but then you've got all of these individuals in the church
Yes.
who are then going out in the community and making an impact for Christ in some incredible ways.
Absolutely. And your talk at the conference that you contributed, you go through 7 steps, which we're not going to get into here. So whatever comes in the future, you're gonna want to. This is a great conversation, and it's going to be very practical. But there's some things that we're not covering here that were definitely covered in the conference. But one of those things that you said was the importance of, yes, connecting with people, and just how important it is that we're telling their stories. And when we can see ourselves within the congregation, we're able to, and when we can see ourselves in the life story of the church,
Yeah.
that is when we're most connected. And I really think that there's a fine line of promotion and creating that kind of fame, that buzz, some of those
Right.
things. And that's the fine line that I'm talking about, that the Mars Hill podcast so well illustrates. But I don't think we can, it's not acceptable to be fearful of those things any longer. And if we're telling stories, we need to be okay. It needs to be done well and responsibly, but we need to do a good job of actually allowing people to connect with other people
Yes.
within our church. So yes, stories, very important. I want to go into how do we make sure that the stories we're telling, maybe we started one social media, we picked a social media, we started there, but in the communications department, so I kind of want to speak specifically to communications departments now, Dr. Jen, thinking about that as kind of our primary audience, or
Yeah.
if you're a church leader here helping lead your communications department. There's lots of veins of communication. Even if we're only on one social media channel, I can still think of email. I can think of even some
Yes.
of our SMS strategies. There's such a comprehensive, just in the digital space alone, there's still such a comprehensive strategy that we have to have where the content is being broken up and delivered out.
Yep.
When you think about strategic communication, how would you speak to this digital age of we're not just putting something in the bulletin and passing it out when people walk through the doors, or sending out a mailer? There's so much more that goes into it. How are we making sure that we're doing this across all the channels, but also not in a competing way or doing
Right.
everything everywhere, even amongst those digital strategies?
Right. Yeah, I think you have to kind of see what can you do at this point in season in your life. So, gosh, back in what was it, 2016, 2015, I can't remember. I was working at a church as their communications director,
Yeah.
and I was there for a specific time frame because I helped put systems in place because they didn't have any systems in place for their communication. And so one of the
Wow.
things that we did is we not only got them going on social media, we shared stories, we had weekly little tidbits of encouragement from the pastor where we would do a live, but we also had like these forums online that we would send people to, like, if you've got a story to share, fill out this form and we'll be in contact with you. If you've got pictures that you've taken that you'd like us to see, send that to us. We'd also have an email list. We started building our email
Yep.
list, so we had something even on the website where people could put in their email if they either had a question for somebody on staff, the
Yep.
pastor, they wanted to know something, an immediate way to get their
Yep.
email so then we could stay in contact with them. So between social media, email, we did advertising,
Yep.
especially when it came to some of our bigger events around Christmas or Easter. So we did a lot of online advertising around that. um and then we even sometimes for some events we sent out like traditional marketing communication, like postcards, different things like that. So there's a variety of things that you can do. I think you
Yes.
have to look at your budget, look at your team, look at your congregation, look where you're at, and then see what are we capable of doing right
Yes.
now, and know again that you don't have to do it all. Just
Yes.
pick and choose the most important things. And personally, I think for me, I don't know, you might differ here with me, but I
Y-
think the two best things a church can do is their social media communication marketing. And number two, figure out a way to build your email list
Yes.
because that email list is gold.
It is gold. And Holly Tate contributed a thought to our conference this year. And Holly Tate was on the podcast a little bit ago and had a whole conversation with Nils about how email is not dead. It's very important.
Right.
I would throw in there also, I think SMS is up there as well,
Yep.
for all of the same reasons. Email gets, a really good email list, like 15 to 20% open rate, right? So if you're
Right.
above that, you're crushing it. Texting, obviously,
Yep.
95% open rate, so that the best. But obviously, we're communicating through those channels differently, but we want to make sure um, that we're not competing, and so it's not like we're going to put the video here and then we're going to send it out the video out in email, and then we're also going to send it. We're going to text it to everybody. Are there strategies that you could give for maybe you have this story that you're going to tell? How do we tell that on social media and then still highlight it, but maybe it's a different vein of communication via email? Or
Yeah.
I'm curious about that. And then maybe the second part of the question would be, um, I know this is the context for our church, as I'm sure it is for many of our listeners. There's just too many things to communicate. We have to whittle it
Right.
down. And the first thing that I go to in my head is like, yes, that's true, but this thing that you need to communicate, that just needs to go out to this segmented email list so we
Yes.
can promote it. We don't have to cram it all into the weekend. How can we utilize these different channels, Dr. Jen, to not cram everything onto the weekend or say it has to go on social or nobody's going to know about it? Because that's just not true.
Right, right. I think you have to decide what is super important for this week, this series, what it is that we're doing right now, because you're absolutely right. You cannot share everything. If you share everything, then nobody's ever going to pay attention to what you send them.
Yes,
It's just, you're going to lose them. And so you have to decide what is it that we need to share this week that then coincides with what is happening at services this weekend. And so I think
totally.
that's super important. What is the most important thing right now? And then to your other question, I would say, I think this is where that content writer. And again, I know a lot of churches don't have a content writer, but I think having somebody who can share a story from a different angle so that you're not just doing copying and pasting from a social media post into an
Yes.
email newsletter, into advertising or whatever. You have to figure out how can you word things, say things differently to connect with the person through the media that you are using. So it's
Yes.
almost like social media. If you're putting something on Facebook, and then you also want to put it on Instagram, well, it probably needs to sound, read,
Yes.
look different because there's different
Definitely.
audiences on different platforms. And the people that are looking at posts on Facebook are going to be different than the people who are looking at posts on Instagram. The people who are
Correct.
looking at posts on Instagram are probably going to be very different than the people who are opening your emails. And
Yep.
so you have to figure out a way to write and showcase content in a way that will connect with your audience.
That's
And
right.
I think that's probably a big part that a lot of, again, businesses, organizations, churches struggle with because it's hard work and it's time
That's
consuming.
right.
But if you want to connect, then you have to really know who are my audiences through these different channels of media, and how can I create content in such a way that will specifically connect with them. Does that make sense?
Yes, totally makes sense.
Okay.
Copywriting is very important.
Yes.
Understanding who you're talking to, and yeah, we do shortcut it by doing the copy paste game,
Right.
which can lead to less effective communication, even if you are telling stories. Less effective communication, which leads to frustration of why aren't people listening? Well, you
Right.
need to make sure that you're talking to them.
Right.
Uh,
And can I
so
say
good.
something real quick?
Yeah,
Yeah.
please.
So, like, I'm thinking, so let's say you've got a story from someone on video that you want to share, and you
Uh,
know that this story is really going to connect with your audience of young families.
yep.
Okay. It's a story that's going to connect with the moms and dads who have toddlers at home right now, and
Yep.
it's really going to connect with them. So that might be a video and copy that you share on Facebook, Instagram, but email, if
Yep.
you've got a list on email that's 60 to 70-year-olds, then maybe instead of sharing that video,
Yes.
there's a quick little note from the pastor about how this sermon this upcoming weekend is going to connect with them. And
So
so
good.
again, it goes back to knowing your audience and creating that content in such a
Yes.
way that will connect with your different audiences.
So good. So good. You don't have to send the same content out to everybody all the
Right.
time. Be
Right.
intentional not only with the copy based on the medium that you're sending it out, but also with who's receiving it. I think the temptation that we fall into as church leaders, I spent so much time making this, everybody needs to see it.
Right.
And instead we need to get into the mindset of, yes, that might have taken a lot of time, but it's going to be more effective when we send it out to the correct audience. And we
That's
should
right.
also be creating margin in our churches where, um, if you do have a larger team, you do have dedicated people to those things so that it doesn't feel like, oh, I spent all this time. Well, yeah, you're the videographer. This was all you're focused on. We're not going to ask you to be the videographer, photographer, be there on the weekend, do all these things, right? Also be the copywriter, also be the one that edits it for social media. And I think that feeling starts to go away when you have intentional people who are filling intentional roles all working together. And again, they don't just have to be staff people. And matter of fact, I would argue they shouldn't be. Empower people within your church to
Yes.
be the church, and hop in there. Dr. Jen, as we wrap up, I want to make sure that we talk about all of the things that you're involved in. You have a podcast. You are a strong female voice, and you do a great job of using your platform to speak to females in this space who are leading people
Yeah.
in all shapes and forms. You have a book, podcast. I'm going to forget them if I try to list them off. I'd love for you to just tell our audience everything that's going on, and you can find all of this stuff and maybe even some other stuff that we forgot to mention in the show notes of this episode. Yeah, Dr. Jen, all those things.
Yeah. So I just recently started a podcast. It went live April 15th. It's called the
Yeah.
She Impacts Culture podcast. I'm super just excited about it because as a communicator, I love sharing the stories of other women. And it has been an absolute pleasure sharing the stories of these women who are allowing God to use them in some incredible ways, whether that's
That's
through
right.
their work, in their communities, in their neighborhoods, and just how they're using their voices, their gifts, skills, and talents to impact this world for Christ. And so, yeah, you can find that on
Yes.
any of the major podcasting platforms. It's called She Impacts Culture. I also have a book out. It's called Be Worth Following, which is like my first little baby, my book baby. But it's all about being a woman who is on social
Yep.
media and being someone who is worth following, because we have an incredible opportunity to share the hope and freedom that is found in Jesus on social media with people all over the world. And if we
Yes.
would use that tool, that medium that we have to really um, share the good news of Jesus through storytelling,
Yes.
you'd be amazed at the doors that would open up. So you can find that book on Amazon. And then, yeah, you can find more information about me, learn more about me at drjenbennett.com. And you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn at Dr. Jen Bennett.
Love that. Last question, Dr. Jen. What is your favorite social media platform currently right now? And I'd imagine that's probably also the best place for people to send you a DM.
Yeah, I would say Instagram. I really like Instagram, although I know they're starting to go to video, which makes me a little sad. Their algorithm's going to be more video
Yeah.
based. So if you're just putting pictures up, it's not going to
I've
reach
noticed
as
that
many
already.
people. Yeah, and I love pictures and stuff like that. But they can really find me on Instagram at Dr. Jen Bennett. I'd love to connect with them there.
Yes, and she genuinely means that. DM her, and we talk about it all the time here. I'm in so many ways, and this is a longer story than what I'm going to dive into. In a lot of ways, I am the co-host of this podcast because way back in 2013, I sent Jay Cranda and Nil Smith a DM asking them questions about how to build a volunteer team. All of the years in between has been a long journey, but you never know where a DM is going to go. And even if they don't respond, that is literally the worst thing that can happen. They don't respond. So if you have questions or you want to connect further with Dr. Jen or myself, always, always, always send us a DM anywhere. Dr. Jen, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Well, I would encourage you, if you haven't yet subscribed to this podcast, wherever you're listening right now, take a moment, hit subscribe, write a review if you want to be extra awesome. This helps church leaders just like yourself find content that's going to help them bring those who are far from God near to God. We realize you do not have all the time in the world to get in the weeds figuring out all of these new social media platforms. And so Nils and I try to connect with the leading voices in this space, have conversations that you can listen to in 30 to 40 minutes so that you don't have to do all of the legwork and research, but your ministry is amplified because of it. So please write a review. Hit subscribe. You can also connect with us at socialmedia.church. Connect with Dr. Jen in the show notes of this episode. And until next time, my name's Aaron, and this is the Social Media Church podcast.